So let's get started. Welcome everyone to our webinar on improving your frontline experience with low-code apps. My name is Claudia Piscatelli. I'll be facilitating today's session. Before we get started though, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet today. For me, I'm based on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I also extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people on the call with us here today. So before I introduce our amazing speakers, I just wanted to quickly talk about Engage Squared and introduce our organisation for anyone who might not be familiar with who we are. So we're Engage Squared. We call ourselves specialists in people-friendly technology. Essentially what that means is that we support big organisations and small organisations to adopt technology in ways that make sense to them. So we do that by developing business applications, which is obviously what we're talking about today. We also build things like intranets. We help with technology adoption, employee experience, and a range of other things. Earlier this year, we were really proud to be named the winner of the Global Employee Experience Award for the Microsoft Partner of the Year Award. So that's just a little bit about us. To introduce our speakers today, we have Andrew Jolly, who is Practice Lead for Information Management at Engage Squared. We also have Rob Carrington, who is the Practice Lead for Business Applications at Engage Squared. We've got two Tims. How lucky are we? We've got Tim Suley, who is Solution Go-to-Market Manager at Microsoft, and also Tim Shaw, who's Cloud Solution Architect at Microsoft as well. So without further ado, let's get stuck into the questions and the discussion for today, because we've got a lot to get through. Let me just stop sharing my screen. All right, Tim Shaw, let's start with you. What do we mean by low-code apps and what's available today?
Yeah, so wow, I could answer that question in a number of ways. So let me just kind of talk about. So let's talk about the concept of what a low-code app is for starters. So low-code app is about something that you can build with minimal effort and with minimal development experience. And the idea of that is really because we want to put it back into the hands of the users to create apps that they want to use for themselves. So when you talk about traditional development, there'd be a team of people that would talk to users or talk to technical teams and go off and build an app, and that app would then be presented and go through iterations of testing and so on. And the challenge with that is that they're very technical. They needed people that had done computer science or had learnt to develop in programming languages that are like foreign to most people that don't do development. And they take time and effort, and then changing them is not easy. So once you've gone down a certain path. So the idea of the low code is to make it so that you can actually build the app by basically using tools that you would be familiar with when it comes to designing boxes and buttons and things like that. So easy to use kind of buttons to go and create your app and put that back into the hands of the users, so the users can actually build their experience and iterate it, as in test it and see if that's going to work. So it is about speeding up the time from when I conceive an app to actually start using the app. And it's about having the platform behind it, which I'll talk more about as we go along today.
Yeah, awesome.
Anybody want to add to what I just said? Anybody else on the line?
That's a good summary. I think it's a good place to start, Tim. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd also add to that to say with low code, it also doesn't necessarily mean the idea of, starting from scratch. It can be accelerated by using existing templates that are out there, existing things that either Microsoft has created within your organization you might have created, or even within the wider community that's being created. So it just means that, as Tim was mentioning, just minimal effort to be able to create a solution. There's a lot of ways that you can look at that.
Yeah, and I think one of the previous conversations we were having talking about this session, Tim, you mentioned low code is not no code, which I think is a good thing to kind of keep in the back of your mind as well. I think it's really great that there are those templates available out there that you can use. but at the same time, low-code apps can be designed so that they're enterprise grade. And they've got all the security features and functionalities that you need as well. So yeah, it's great that flexibility is there. Let's move on to the next question. We'll stick with you, Tim. I'm keen to understand why Microsoft is investing so much in low-code development.
Oh, there's a few reasons for that, but let me talk about, first of all, the research that says basically over the next few years, there's going to be another 750 million apps created around the world to do a lot of things, because customers are struggling with unstructured data and bringing that data into a useful way to be used by their employees and by their customers and by their teams. So there's a huge demand to create apps for businesses that continues. And the reality is there's not enough developers in this world to actually create those apps. 750 million apps is a lot of apps to be building. And there's not enough developers. So we started with, and to go to what you said before, just before Claudia, we started with basically building a platform that was designed for citizen developers, with the concept of allowing everybody to be able to develop things. And we have case studies on the Microsoft sites of like somebody in Heathrow, an airport baggage person in Heathrow, starting to create apps to make their workday easier, you know, so to automate things. I have an example of a not-for-profit up in Brisbane that's created an app, and it's a simple app that's come from the concept of the users that literally, when I started at this place, how do I find somebody to help me that has knowledge in this particular I don't know, subject, or maybe they're the fire warden for Brisbane or whatever. How do I actually find out who's in this organization that's got, you know, a few hundred people? How do I actually get connected with everyone, because they're split across multiple states? So they built a low-code app, and it was about the user experience, so being able to search and find people. So search for fire warden and find a list of people. And the people that did that had no development experience prior to that, and they literally just got in and started building the app. And to Rob's point is they could use templates to start with this, or they could start from scratch. These guys started with what we call canvas, blank canvas. So they started it. But the next part of it, the power of it, became in the back end. It was quite easy to connect it to multiple data sources they had in their organization already. One was a human resources platform. The other one was actually to do with employee data on logins. They were able to connect the two together and give the data, bring that unstructured data together to give that view so they can do firewall. So Microsoft's investing in it because obviously the demand for it, but also it's where we come from traditionally of you know, supporting the development community. It is about the next generation. So how can more people create things that can then make this world better for everyone, because that's kind of where our heart comes from.
Yeah, that's awesome. Rob, did you want to add something there?
Yeah, I wanted to add something, Tim. It was interesting with the first part you mentioned as well, around the research showing, hey, there's going to be so many, I think we're saying, you know, it was 450 million apps being developed over the next few years. And I remember the first time I saw a lot of those statistics from research showing, hey, here's the demand for these kinds of apps growing. Technical resources are hard to find, especially from a very developer focused background. I was skeptical from that research myself before the pandemic. Since that has happened, there has been such a large shift I've seen across different industries, talking with different organizations, where that has changed so much. Just overnight, people had to be able to create these kinds of solutions where it needed to be something they could get in the hands of their frontline workers much more quickly, because they said, we need them to do this for either safety reasons or a different customer experience, or being able to provide a better experience. And ourselves who are working on these solutions, we need to work together in different regions as well. How can we do this in a digital landscape when we used to be in the same location? And because it's becoming more difficult to try and find those technical skills, they say, we don't have the people who can develop these solutions. How can we solve this problem? So that's where, when you've said, hey, the demand is growing, it absolutely is there, and it's something that has been very real. So having a way to create these solutions specifically for frontline staff is such a huge focus that I've seen happen over the last 2 or so years.
Yeah, and that's a really great segue into my next question. AJ, we'll start with you. What are some of the common use cases that we're seeing for organizations with large frontline?
Yeah, I think the ones that strike me is my favorite ones that tend to resonate when I think of frontline type things is things that that make those really common not mundane, but just those common tasks people have to do a lot more easier, and they end up doing them. So for examples are like health and safety type things, right? Like having a power app in your hand to report a problem or a risk, like with a photograph right there and then. That's got way more chances of happening than someone going, oh, I must remember to send the note to someone when I get back to the office, or I must remember to do that when I'm on my lunch break, and then of course it never happens. So I've seen some really great stuff we've built where helping people to book cars, like vehicles, for organizations with vehicle pools, but more importantly, not just checking out a vehicle, but also recording sort of when you're due to arrive at your destination, because in some instances, and this particular customer of ours was a gas company, they travel big distances in the outback, and they hit roos, they hit all sorts of things on the motorway, and that being late could be a signal of someone being in trouble on the side of the road, rolled in a ditch. So there's, and of course with that date, if you haven't finished your journey on your Power App, then it can alert someone via email or via notification or even SMS. I don't think we did SMS, but that was on the cards, that, hey, this person hasn't checked in. You know, I think those sorts of things is a real kind of not just health and safety reporting on things that have gone wrong, but really proactive stuff, I think, that are helping people with their safety and well-being. Even down as, I think probably another example is low code doesn't always have to be a Power App either. Like, I think people need to realize that the Power Platform itself. So if anyone on the call, if you've made a Power Automate solution with Flow, you're doing low code, right? So pat on the back, right? But we also see the ways of surfacing things inside teams that are low code. So in fact, I saved this for this call this morning. I'll just share my screen really quick, Claudia. This won't take a minute. But this is we have a little a low code application, so it's a Flow internally here at the office. So I'm just going to share once it stops spinning on me. But we send a little message every morning to people at 9 o'clock. And it's an adaptive card. Some of you might know what that is. It's coming through Teams in the Teams interface, and what it's doing is it's asking, where are you going to be working today? Are you working in the office, from home, or other? And we can grab a little comment as well. And so what that does is I don't know if I'm going to be able to share, but we'll give it a shot. What that does is it just records that information in a SharePoint list. And we can get to that SharePoint list through Teams or through SharePoint, and we get a bit of a look at, we can see at a glance where our team is, people in the company, whether they're expected to be there in the office or what have you. Here's the interface here. So this is a low code solution. You know, we're saying it's an adaptive card, comes through, looks like a chat really. I'm actually working from home today. Have a webinar as well, and then we can submit. We also have a snooze button there for people that don't want to take part in it, and the snoozes, and then of course the data is surfaced in a list for everyone to get to, and we can see where people are in any time of the day. Now that was particularly useful. Here's our list here showing where people are and whether they've checked in and the last time they. This is kind of a little example there of how you can use these low code. They don't have to be complicated solutions, but what that's doing is it's helping people understand where we all are, particularly in this COVID environment. And yeah, so I think I like the simple solutions that have big impact. But yeah, the ones that excite me the most are the health and safety type ones. I think they're really great. And yeah, so, but Rob, you other ones that you know of?
Yeah, absolutely. And looking at different ones that within low code, health and safety is quite a bit. We've done a few different ones for clients where it might be if they need to do what's called a take 5 before they start working on a work site, they can record to say, hey, here's a few different questions I've got in here. I'll also share my screen if I can bring this up on here. But the idea is to say, before you start, here are some questions. And what would happen before is people would need to write this down on paper. And then they would have to see, okay, you've answered this, this, and this. You will need to ask a lot of different questions. And don't worry too much about the video. There's a few different things that this does. But the Take 5 itself would solve the problem of you're asking all these questions of someone who is on site, they're about to start their work, and they now have to look at, all the safety checks they need to do, and you need to provide them with the right information. So what happens in a paper-based form is you can't really give that recommendation that's going to be custom for them. So being able to give them a few questions they answer and saying, actually, here are the things you need to look for, does two things. Number one, it reduces the load of someone who's having to start their work and think about safety, and makes them think about the most important things that are relevant to them. And also it minimizes that risk of any kind of safety hazard from happening. That's a really important one. And even other parts of being able to do a fatigue assessment, trying to do that on a piece of paper where you need to be able to add in different weightings of, hey, you've got these symptoms or you've been working for this long. Here's a few things that you need to think about and add all these up. Someone who's already tired probably isn't going to complete this, but being able to ask a few simple questions and say, actually, yes, you should stop working right now. Call up your site manager and then see if there's an alternative that you can, an alternative arrangement that you can have, get some sleep, go home. That's important because I think, like you were saying, AJ, out of everything, I find that anything that is going to make employees safe is such an important thing. And I agree with some of the other parts of low code doesn't need to always be a Power Platform, because I love the Power Platform so much, but it's because it's within the whole Microsoft 365 stack that low code can be just using bits and pieces from everything. So you might use a simple, let's say, Power App just for getting people to fill out some information, but you don't need to build the whole solution within Power Apps itself. You might be using something like Dynamics or SharePoint lists or the Dataverse to manage that data. Why build that interface yourself when you've got that part of Office 365?
Yeah,
and then
actually, that's common. Commonly, Rob, we see the Power BI used too. So, I showed you, we capture the data in a form, store it in a SharePoint list. But let's say you capture data in Power App. You don't need to try and build that interface in the Power App, do you, Rob? You could use Power BI to create all that interface in very, very rapidly. And more importantly, you can change it as regularly as you need to without having to go through these great big development cycles as well.
Yeah, so, that's a great point. Tim, Suley, I'm interested to hear your take on common use cases that you're seeing from a Microsoft perspective.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the biggest ones is sort of retail and the shop floor. Now that we're all sort of back in store and shopping, making sure that we've got planogram and campaign execution tracking. So from a marketing perspective, marketers can go out and send their promotions across their store network and ensure that it's all compliant and up to brand standards. I think that's a great one. The compliance and health and safety element is of course quite huge as well. Another one back on the shop floor is inventory management. So being proactive about what stock levels are like on the shop floor, and then using those data models that like SharePoint lists, Excel spreadsheets, and Power BI dashboards to notice when you do have stock issues and be a lot more proactive about it. I think is a great use case scenario. Just the way you access those apps too. Andrew, you mentioned having them on the shop floor, of course. So there's devices that you're taking around the store, whether it's an iPhone, Android device, or a specific frontline device, right? You're bringing those experiences onto the shop floor, and it's not something you have to take to a back office to execute on. So
way more timely, isn't it? Exactly. Actually, stock stuff's interesting. One of Rob's early apps was a stock transfer app, and it was to move chocolate between shops and warehouses. So it was a fun one to build.
And Tim, that's a good point around the retail around retail industry, especially in shop fronts as well. And I think that's something where low code in both Power Platform itself and also just using a template is very useful, because that's where you can very easily try to understand, is this actually going to be useful? Because you don't need to try and build something from scratch, have your own very specific requirements. You can see, let's try some existing template that already exists, which does exist within Teams, which is the inspections app. See, does this work for us? Great, it works for most of the use cases here. We're seeing some positive feedback, and now we know some other parts that we can actually invest some time in to extend upon this, rather than starting from scratch. Because why spend all that time where you're not going to be able to get the right feedback straight away and see, is this going to be working for people who are going to be using this?
Yeah, I love that. And Tim, you mentioned before, marketing and comms and getting them to be able to communicate to people on the front line. I think devices are obviously a big part of that. And how do you actually access that message? Usually it's notice boards, or I used to work in retail and we would have a meeting before we would start our shift where people would tell us what we need to do for the day. So being able to access these type of messages through things like Teams, where you can take a photo and say, yep, that task, even just for task management as well, right? So if you do get something from head office and you can say, yep, I've done that display like this, take a quick photo on your phone and send that through Teams. It stops things like shadow IT. Another really big one that we're seeing at the moment is shift management and integration with existing applications, for example, like Kronos. We're doing a big project at the moment with a large enterprise customer in Australia on integrating their shifts and how they manage that through Teams and with Kronos as well. So there's heaps and heaps of, I think, interesting things you can do with the Power Platform, and also just business applications in general, to try and streamline processes and stop things like shadow IT, right? Because instead of people having to go onto WhatsApp to share patient data or to swap shifts, like these are things that are happening, right? So we want to make sure that we reduce that. Tim Shaw, I can see you've come off mute.
Yeah, I was going to, I mean, it's a good point, bro, because we're talking about access to citizen developers. We're talking about building apps that can be used by users, and we're accessing those apps in different formats here, whether it's through Teams or whether it's through mobile devices or whether it's through web. But something you just mentioned, you said the word enterprise, and I think it's kind of understanding where this product actually can go. When we first built it, it was very much designed to look at citizen developers. As we went on and our customers adopted the product and started using things, we realized that it's actually not just about citizen developers, it's actually about proper developers, or I don't know if that's a right thing to say, but people that do development for their job, let's say it that way, so I don't get myself in trouble.
Classical.
Yeah. So the developers. So the platform supports both ends. You can be a citizen developer building something nice and simple, or even building something complex but using tools that are easy to use, or you can be a developer and using actual tools that developers are used to, like VS Code and repositories, etc. And then the enterprise side is super important, because where is your data? So if I go and decide I'm going to use an app from AppSource or an app from one of the mobile stores where they sell apps, where's my data? Who's got access to my data? Is my data secure? How do I make sure that it's being used in a compliance manner? And and I think it'll become a big thing here in Australia, specifically after recent events. But in Europe, it's a big thing about what happens if your customer data is leaked outside your organization. There's fines and all sorts of issues that come to you as a business, apart from what you see in the media. So not only are we talking about building apps, but we're also building apps on a secure platform that does go through what we call pen testing. So testing to see if hackers can get into it by third parties, and it gets reported on each year. And as a result, we learn and we improve, because that's an ever-changing landscape. But versus I've created an app, and be careful what I say here as well, and maybe it's being developed in a country that is known to have a lot of hackers, and you're putting your data on there for them. You're basically using their app, and now that data is exposed in the dark web and being used for a lot of other things. Or even not so kind of dramatic things, but even maybe that data is being shared as marketing lists. So now you're getting emails and you're wondering why you're getting those emails about certain products and so on, and it's because data is being collected on online systems you're using, or apps that you've used, or your apps that you put in your business that will actually do what you need it to do, but you're not in control of the platform behind. So I think it's, when we talk about this can be quite citizen developer developing stuff, but behind there's security, there's scalability, and there's compliance to make sure that what you're building is not going to put your business at risk.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And just on that, and I think this kind of flows into a great question that Mark's put in the chat as well around adoption and getting the right buy-in for these types of things. Rob, we know that, you know, tech adoption is really, really important. It's all great if you can build something shiny and new, but if people aren't using it, that's such a big waste of money. Where have you seen organizations misstep in their thinking or their delivery of low-code apps for frontline that other people could learn from?
Yeah, it's a really good question because it comes from so many different angles. But I think the two biggest things I find are, number one, trying to build low-code solutions for frontline workers for them, but not with them. That has changed where I have worked with organizations and we said, this is the use case we're going to do. This is our top priority, number one priority. Also, during this initial workshop, we've actually invited some people, different line managers from our different sites, and we're going to get them in here to make sure we're getting feedback from them on this. And I did the intro for the context around, hey, you know, here's what we're talking about. And they said, no, this other use case, this is what we need right now. This is going to make the biggest difference for us. And I think that was the most important part, is making sure you're not just making those assumptions, not just saying, yeah, we know this is going to be important as a business, because if it's something that's going to make the lives of frontline staff better, work with them for it. I know, having worked in a retail shop front as well, one of the biggest things I had was, it was beautiful, was just even having my roster change from it all being paper-based to we finally got a digital roster. That took so long, but when we finally got it, I felt better about working for the organization. And I think that's the one misstep that a lot of organizations forget, is providing a better employee experience, building it with them. Because what it means is, if people are happier about the tools that they can use either to build solutions or even use their user tools for their job, they feel better about staying there. I felt annoyed so much having to deal with how I would do shift swaps, how I might be able to request time off, all these things. There was always just that level of uncertainty. But then having a tool that could do that was huge for me. So I think that's one of the biggest parts. And one of the other biggest things that I see a lot is trying to solve everything from a technology sense, trying to solve all of the, let's say, governance problems up front. And I know Andrew Jolly has so many things to talk about this as well, but it's trying to say, we need to make sure we have all of our strategy down pat. We need to have our full governance documentation on how we're going to do security, user access, how we create all these different spaces within here, how we do all this. You can spend so much time doing that. It's going to change because you're not using it, because you're not building out these solutions yet, because things change over time. Whatever you come up with at the start changes. And if you've spent a lot of time coming up with this one governance model and something doesn't fit into that specific system, you realize, oh, we didn't account for that. Well, it does need a change. You can't say, well, it didn't fit into this, so we're not going to change it. So one of the key things I would say, especially from a low code standpoint, is if you're having trouble from a governance perspective, especially within the Power Platform, is at a bare minimum, I've said this so many times, but at a bare minimum, just have at least one data loss prevention policy within the Power Platform that you are happy with to say, we can connect to these services. That goes such a long way to say, we're comfortable with people using this. Because if you say, well, we're so worried about people building things on this, they're going to go to those other platforms, or they're going to spend so much trying to solve these problems themselves. And I think those are two of the largest issues I see, is trying to solve for everything in governance without realizing governance isn't the end. Governance is what is meant to support people creating solutions for different parts of an organization, in particular frontline, where there are so many things that can be done for them that could be implemented much more quickly with a low-code platform. And one final part of saying there is, and particularly to Mark's point around when there's so much of an ownership put on the I guess tech side and IT around systems, that's a challenge in itself, because these kinds of things should be collaborative between business and IT. Those are nice words to say, but really it's trying to look at what are the things that they're worried about. I typically see they're worried about data loss, and they're also worried about, well, will we lose what we can create? Will we lose what we can create in here? Because maybe does this mean people don't need developers or very technical people? Or does this mean now we're just going to have a platform that's only built for these small little solutions? Being able to talk to them about the platform, when I talk to those organizations, has evolved so much since it's come out. Back in preview about the end of 2015, but general availability in 2017, it has matured so much that if you want that technical side to get buy-in, I see from they say, where's application lifecycle development? That is all built in here. And I feel that is quite nice to be able to say you have the professional side for professional development. But if you want people to build out quick solutions from the front line, you can absolutely solve those use cases as well. But I'll save a few other ones for the rest of everyone. I think I've gone to a few different areas.
I think the other, I was going to
ones.
add there, Rob, the other fear I see that often after pulling off some of the covers of people's pain and things and symptoms is quite often there's a sort of an innate concern that the use of the Power Apps and things is going to result in a deluge of support requests, right? And that's very valid. I mean, IT support departments are just totally overwhelmed normally all the time. No one really thinks to they put a new system in and they don't think to add any capacity to the IT support. They think it can all just work. So we all know that problem. I reckon I definitely see, and I've seen a couple of organizations institute this, is that they sort of grade their application. So there's an element of being able to self-serve, right? And then there's an element of having a bit of IT support. So that's another sort of category B, and then a category C type application, which might be an enterprise grade 1, as Tim was saying, right? Now, at that self-service level, it's like any other support policy that IT can put in place, is that you don't have to respond in a heartbeat to every call that comes in. If I called up our IT support with a crazy macro in Word and when it's broken, they're not going to prioritize that over someone else's system issue, right? And that is completely normal and acceptable to do. So I think there's an element of saying, if we're going to bring Power Apps to the organization, how do we stop the load on IT? Let's determine and set the expectation with the business just what sort of support we're going to give for the different types of either self-built, homegrown type stuff, or the ones that need a bit more attention. So that's kind of IT service management theory. I think if some of you might be kind of connecting the dots here, I think that's a really important decision to make and conversation to have with the business. And I think you get a lot of calm a lot of nerves in the IT space, because a lot of the time things are turned off because no one wants the extra support calls. And what they are doing is they're nipping out to systems outside, as you were saying, Rob, swiping credit cards and using other systems. And while the problem is out of sight, out of mind, when there's a breach, it all comes back to IT, right? Everyone's asking the questions, right? So you can't escape the risk. So I think sometimes it's better to have the stuff in your environment and look after the information, let them use those tools, monitor them for sure, make sure they're using the tools correctly. And there's some awesome solutions for that. We might touch on that later on, Rob.
Yeah, AJ, one thing that you said to me before a long time ago that's really stuck with me is the sprawl internally is better than, you know, sprawl outside of the boundaries within your security boundaries, right?
Yeah, I totally subscribe to that. Like, if it's better that you're creating a mess in your own backyard than having it all out there in the world without any control over it. You know. Yeah. You know, like, for example, I mean, topical at the moment, you know, Optus is doing their best with their problem. But imagine if that was a system out of Optus's control. You can imagine how hard that would be if that wasn't under your own control as from an IT perspective. I don't know anything about that, the details of that problem, but you can imagine it would be 50-fold harder to try and solve a breach that was because of some Dropbox or some weird cheap platform out there. You know, you're better to be in the backyard of your own world than out there in the Wild West sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Keen to move on to the next question. And Alistair, hello, good to see you. Thanks for joining. Alistair put in there, which I think is relevant to this question around costs, and, you know, that being a little bit confusing for some organisations. AJ, maybe let's start with you, and then Tim Shaw, I'm keen to get your thoughts on this as well. How can organisations get started with their low-code app journey? What things do they need to be considering?
Yes. Around costs is quite interesting. Definitely a lot. There's a lot you can do in your kind of E3 type licensing, which is commonly what probably most people on the call are probably at that E3 level, maybe even below. Lots there. Whenever you get into the premium type actions, you know, immediately people think, oh, I've got to buy everyone a premium Flow license or a Power Automate license or something, and that's going to cost me $40 a month, and there's just 60 people, and oh no, I'm blowing the budget. But the thing is, there's actually other options for you. So there are ways of buying licensing, say at Power Automate, called a per flow license, which actually gives you 5, and they're at a substantially like competitive rate to try and license everyone up. Like, it might be $150 a month for an app that countless people can use, for a Power Automate that countless people can interact with. A lot of people don't know that. They haven't done that sort of learning. So that's something, just watch out if you're doing calculations, because sometimes, and reach out to people like ourselves, because we can help you on sort of get a feel for what you're trying to do. And quite often it's a surprise as to how cost effective things can be. On the Power Apps side, there's been some good movements, hasn't there, Rob, of late, well, I say late, probably in the last 18 months, I'd say, where there's a per app license for when you're building Power Automate solutions, Power App solutions. Platform solutions.
Based on there's a lot of inclusions within the frontline licenses that people can use. But if you're trying to connect to any premium services, some people say, well, we're not too sure what the uptake of this might be, how often people are going to use this. So we want to see what's a way that we can not have to pay for all the licensing up front. It's a bit more elastic. So being able to have a consumption model, if you want to do that for different kinds of apps or automations you create, I found has been a big shift, because now with those premium examples of connecting to those data sources, like if you're using, say, SQL, or you're using Dataverse, or all these kinds of scalable backends, it's a really good way to say, well, people might actually only use this once a month for inventory management. So we'll use it based on the consumption of when they use it in this 1 month, or maybe they might use it every few months. Not too sure. I'd love to hear Tim's thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, so Tim, did you want to talk, or will I talk?
Yeah, I might just quickly add something and throw back to you, but I think the other thing as well is that pay-as-you-go model affects seasonality of workers too, which is a big sort of cost inhibitor. Is the seasonality of workers, and being able to pay as you go is what makes Power Apps so accessible. So both from the code environment right through to the use, it does make Power Apps and low code application so accessible. But that's pretty much what I had there. So I'll throw back over to you, Tim Shaw.
No. Yeah, so we do listen to our customers, and I think to Andrew's point before, we did make changes, like the $40 per app per user per month went away quite a while ago, and it's $27.50 per user per month. There's a pay-as-you-go, there's a per user app, and then there's is it already included with my licensing that I've already got for Office. So there is a licensing guide that we can give you a link to, and there is a site on that. And I'm sure if you need help, where all of us on this call would be more than happy to kind of help you guide through that. It is all about bundling, and I think we've tried to, by trying to cater for a number of areas, sometimes we make our licensing a little bit more complex. I think it's probably an understatement, and a number of you on the call may kind of say that's an understatement, but I think with this one, it gets complex because we try to give it as part of other applications. So part of Office, part of the Dynamics Suite allows you, part of Teams allows you access to it. So there's a lot of ways, and depending on how complex you want to go, the pricing, as Andrew said, can change. But we do have details about that, and we do have people inside Microsoft, and we do have licensing guides to work that out. And you can work out, well, if I needed to go for everything, how much is this going to cost me versus pay as you go. I do have a customer that started off using the Power Apps per user plan, which was at $40 when they first signed up. These days they use the pay as you user per app plan, pay as you go, because the reality is they were paying for every user and they weren't using it, consuming it, to use Robert's terms as well. And they saw a dramatic cost reduction, and that was, I think, October last year when we brought that in. So yes, it can be a little bit confusing, but it's probably not as confusing as you think, and we're more than happy to kind of help walk you through it. And you can kind of see where you're going to be at when you go to use a product.
Yeah, and interesting too. I was chatting to an organisation once about, like, they were sort of looking at the numbers and thinking, you know, doing the total cost of ownership stuff's important too when you're factoring in things, especially if you they were doing a move to the cloud and there was some Power Apps to build, and the numbers looked like they were creeping really high, and I said, well, you're decommissioning your 3 SharePoint farms, aren't you? And they'll, by the end of the year, yes. And then so that money was maybe not even 25% of the cost of these licenses, and they're like, oh, and that sort of suddenly the conversation changed a little bit, because they hadn't been thinking about the sunk costs that they currently have, and so on. And I think that conversation sometimes extends into things like, and I think this is where it really stands out, and it's kind of topical right now with all these breaches and stuff, is around authentication and security. So we do a few of these power portals. I think they're called Power Apps, Power Platform pages now, I think. We're getting mixed up. But you know, extranets that allow people to sort of come in and log in and get data without coming in as guests to your tenant, right? So quite a neat scenario. All the authentication is provided like in the platform. So now, if you think about authentication, you think about security. And Tim and I, we had chat about this. It's like if you were sort of growing that, or trying to manage your own web app and your own little performance-based authentication database and your own security, you know, I don't know if I wouldn't sleep as well as night knowing, unless I had a big organization doing that if I could. And that's kind of what the Power Platform can offer in that space. So you kind of have to not just look at you have to look at potential things that you couldn't even do yourself as being part of the value proposition. And I think security and authentication is one of them. I
think that's a great point, Andrew. I mean, I come from a period where people had servers in their offices, underneath desks. Sometimes they had them in closets that had air conditioning attached to them to kind of keep control, or they used third-party providers that would actually basically have buildings full of servers, and they'd be managing those. And I think I've seen data lost just because someone would take a tape and put it on top of their speaker, and then when the actual system went down, magnetic tapes don't like being put near speakers, and speakers are magnetic. When their system went down, they couldn't restore it. So it is when you look at total cost of ownership and you start putting everything together, it is around about what hardware would I need to be able to do this. And you've got to remember that when you're dealing with Dataverse, which is where our database is, or the data is kept, that's premium storage. So it's fast, it's scalable. You don't pay any more money for how much you hammer that storage. You pay money for if you use a lot of storage, that's kind of that side. But you're talking about premium storage. You're not talking about some solid state drives I brought from Umart that I've put in a PC underneath my desk. And you're talking about resilience, and you're talking about the ability to recover and the protection of your data. And you can't, unless you've got scale like Microsoft has, the cost of doing that per business to that level that we do it is phenomenal, and you wouldn't be doing it unless you potentially were a bank with your servers underground or something like that. But so I think it's important when you're looking at cost, when you're paying $6.90 per user per app per month, or $27.50 per user on a plan where you can have as many apps as you like, you're not just paying for access to an app, you're paying for access for security, you're paying for storage, you're paying for a whole heap of other things to keep your data protected and out of the hands of those bad actors, as we call them in the security area, you know, people that are potentially trying to get your data, some just to market to you. Maybe that's not as bad, you know, getting every time you go to a website, all of a sudden getting emails about stuff you looked at. It's pretty cool these days, not? But then the other side of it, where they actually maliciously want to use your data to sell it to make money, or to get things from you. Yeah.
Actually, the cost of storage is interesting, Tim. I was just doing the calculations the other day on an Azure Cosmos DB, and most people think, oh, that's really premium, that's got to be really expensive. And so I was doing my maths, and I came up with like $37 a month, and I was like, I must have done this wrong. So I'm checking my numbers again, and then I'm asking Rob to check them, because I'm like, I've made a mistake here. This is like $37 a month for this high traffic kind of this Azure Cosmos DB, and no, that was the cost. And so I think there is a perception there that these services are somehow supposed to cost heaps and heaps of money. But if you're architecting them right, and you know how you're going to use them, and you plan ahead, they actually don't have to be very costly things. They can actually be quite affordable in the grand scheme of your solution that you're building. So yeah, licensing is a big field. We definitely, you know, I'm not saying everyone should become it's on it, but do try and familiarize yourself. If you have questions, people like us, we can connect you with the Microsoft people, and we can get the answers pretty quick. So yeah, it's a fun area.
Just on that point as well, what support is available from Microsoft, Tim Shaw? I'll ask that one to you.
Okay, we'll come and build it. No, we are actually, it's quite funny, I was just going to make a joke, but we are actually starting to build capabilities to kind of build apps from APIs. So you can basically grab the API, and the system will go and create the base app for you, and then you're just moving it around. So we are making it more efficient. But if you go to powerapps.microsoft.com, and you go down the bottom of that page, there's a get started link, and you can click on that. We have learning resources online. You can actually go to Power Apps, and there's a Power App that helps you learn how to build a Power App. So basically, as you go through it, you answer questions and it continues. There is the capability to do things like hackathons. Look at doing hackathons within your organization with a partner, as well as we run them from time to time. So there's a lot of different ways to get started. I mean, we ran a hackathon with a not-for-profit up here in Brisbane only 2 or 3 months ago, and that involves being out of the business for two days to kind of, the first day to kind of conceptualize the app, the second day to finish it. I think in their case, we did it actually on 1 day, but it wasn't just about building an app and learning what you could do with Power Apps. It was actually also an opportunity for that business to bring across bring the silos of their business together. And in fact, they organized the teams. So each team had people from different parts of the business. So they had that ability to kind of do that team building as part of that hackathon as well. And solve for problems. They chose the problems they wanted to solve for internally, and then they went off not only building an app, but they also talked openly together all about the problem the challenge they were trying to do. So it's a good team building exercise to run a hackathon internally as well. So I'd kind of encourage that sort of for an uptake, because to Andrew's perspective earlier that he shared, all I could think of is, in the old days it was designed by somebody for users. These days it's designed by users for users, or created by users for users, which is a powerful thing. You can still get economy of scales where you can have go into the more detailed apps where they're being built by the tech team in the back end with users helping build the front end. And that's probably the most important part, is the front end, the user experience for the question about adoption. If you tried to do what you can do with Power Apps with something like Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations, you get into trouble, because once you've designed that something in that product, it's kind of set in stone to a certain way, and unraveling that is quite hard. That's why the Power Platform connects to Finance and Operations, so that people can build apps using the data out of Finance and Operations and interact back with the product without that rugged and no going back sort of methodology, because it's not an agile sort of development environment in that product. Whereas in the Power Platform, whether you're dealing with flows or whether you're dealing with Power Apps or whether you're dealing with Power BI, it is more agile. So you can make a mistake and go back and change that mistake and make it work for the users. So
yeah,
I think I would go to powerapps.com, go down the bottom, get started. I would also see some of the organizations here that work with Microsoft and so on. I'd also consider setting up a hackathon to work through with the team and see what, do the art of what's possible.
Yeah, the two things I want to mention
too, I think.
Oh,
yeah. Sorry, Claudia, I was just going to say, and starting small with something, not just to learn about the tech, but also to learn about how that fits in your organization. How does it fit in your IT service management? How does it fit? If there's a few mistakes you make, it's not going to be the end of the world. And then you build up that familiarity and that capability and demonstrate value to people in decisions of budgetary prowess. I think that's definitely a good place to begin. Yeah. Sorry, Claudia, go ahead.
No, all good. I was just going to say, Tim, that idea of employees having great ideas to be able to on what applications need to be built. I've just put a link in the chat to Sideways 6, they're an ideas platform, but their story from Marks and Spencer I think is great, particularly in the case of Frontline. So they had a store member who was hard of hearing. Customers would approach her, and if they were behind her, she couldn't hear them. So she didn't know that they needed her help. So she put in an idea to the head office. It's actually not a BizApps idea, but I still think it's a great way to actually get your people involved, to say, can I have a specially made T-shirt that says on my back, I'm hard of hearing. If you need me, tap me on the shoulder or come round so I can see you. Getting ideas and getting your staff involved, I think, is really big. The other point I wanted to make to your comment, Bryce, in the chat about people having great ideas, and it's true. You almost kind of you don't want to take too many ideas from people, because you end up designing something that's a bit of a zombie. Doesn't have all the things that they need, doesn't always make it usable. I think that's where the notion of having a center of excellence is really important. And Rob, I'm sure you can probably add commentary here around having a Power Platform center of excellence. So you give people some freedom to do what they want, but within the confines of the right governance as well, so that it can go through the right design phase and so forth, so that it is usable.
That's a very smart thing. It talks to what Andrew was talking about before around, hey, there are different kinds of apps that people can make for different purposes, and they shouldn't be treated the same way. If someone's just trying to, maybe create a pilot or a proof of concept to test with one store, that's just going to be for one store. If it's, for a particular site that people need to manage for something, or one particular project, it's because, hey, we have this site here that is different to other regions where we operate. We just need to make it for this particular team. That should be treated differently to something that's going to be enterprise-wide or business critical. And the hard thing is, people don't always know when they're creating it that it's going to become that. They think this might be a good idea. So that's some of the worry we get from organizations as well, talking about, hey, some resistance for IT, but that center of excellence, it's both from the idea or a concept of a center of excellence of, hey, best practices, here's how you can look at categorizing different solutions people create. But one of the really smart things is, and thank you, Claudia, for sending the link, is Microsoft provides a starter kit to say, hey, deploy this. And I would say there are so many great things in there, Two of the things I will say are very useful to get started, because there's so many different things that Microsoft worked with a lot of different organizations to say, what are the important things around Power Platform and adoption and governance that people could use? They created this. Two things I would check out is have a look at the dashboards that get created, because you can start to see where people are creating different solutions, who's creating them, use them as a way to create a champions network there. But also, if you're worried about then, is this going to be a small solution or a large solution? There are automations built into this starter kit as well to say, hey, depending on how much this is getting used, is it shared with this amount of users or these many groups? You can then automate some of the process to say, oh, hey person, we saw that your solution is quite popular. We want you to own this, but we just want to make sure you fill in some information so you understand, just, is there someone else who has a backup who we could talk to? Is there also a plan just in case something's not, working right? Just so that it's giving the ownership to the business, but it's a bit of IT helping in that way to say, have you thought about these considerations? And it's not always, because once again, you could say, well, we create a form that people use up front to ask this, but people don't always know that answer at the start, because it's something I think is going to be small but grows over time. So this is a good example. Apply governance after the fact when things grow a bit more. That way, you can start to support once a solution is starting to grow. So absolutely check that out.
Yeah, sure. I just thought I'd flick this up because we're almost at time as well. I've put in a couple more links in the chat for you guys to have a look at, including if you want a bit more of a deep dive, we do offer a 2-day maturity assessment. So please feel free to check that out and get in touch. In terms of support from Microsoft, there's usually money on the table for you guys. So if you want a Microsoft funded 2-day workshop with Engage Squared or with other Microsoft partners, that's something that I would suggest you could explore as well. There is a specific workshop for frontline, so called Enable Frontline workshop. There's also a Teams Apps and Solutions workshop. So lots of different ways for you to explore how you can improve that frontline experience through low-code applications. Feel free to scan the QR code. We'll send through this pack with a link as well if you're interested in finding out more about these funded workshops from Microsoft. But with that, I'd just like to ask our amazing panelists if anyone has any final words of wisdom that they'd like to share with the audience. Otherwise, we will wrap up. Tim Shaw, I'll give you the final word.
Oh no, don't do that to me. No, I think I want to say just a quick thank you to everybody that's come along to listen to us chat today. I think it's been an interesting conversation with Andrew and Robert and Claudia and the other Tim. There's 2 Tims, which is good. And I really I'm having been involved in working with some customers on building Power Apps for the last 2 years. I see the value. For me, it's obvious. I come from a value-based background as well as technical base. I can see the value it can make to an organization, and it kind of excites me that especially when we put the capabilities that were reserved for a few into everyone, so allowing everyone to actually participate and create apps and create business processes is a good thing, because there's so many people that are not developers that have got talent to build these sort of things and make differences in their business and in the world. It's not funny. So I love this product for that.
Yeah, awesome. Fantastic parting words. Well, thank you everyone for joining today. It's been a pleasure to have you all join the call. If you do want to continue the conversation, please get in touch with any of us that's been part of the conversation today. We're more than happy to continue the conversation for your organization. Have a lovely day.